What about the light? I'm having a different device than my teaching voice. It's a bell. I'd like to say good evening to everybody, and it's great to see so many people here tonight. It's just wonderful, and we have very good to see all the people, and some people haven't seen for a while, so welcome. And also the husbands and different partners and different people that have come in the door. It's really lovely to see you, lovely to have you here. Welcome. So I'm Jean James, the president of the Canberra Jung Society, the people that don't know who I am. And thank you for joining us again here at MacKillop House and online. Let us first acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. This evening, we're delighted to welcome someone well known to most of us, our own very own Terry Curtin. Thank you. Speaking with us this evening about symbolism of the Tarot, central themes in Dr. Jung's thinking. Terry will comment on themes in Jung's thinking, such as synchronicity, which occurs a lot with Robert and I, the Unus, Mundus, and the Kabbalah. Terry Curtin has a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Theology, a Master of Theology, and a Diploma of Transpersonal Counselling. You might remember his presentation to us, Carl Jung and Mr. Picard, in 2019. Carl Jung and the Sacred Marriage in 2022. So Terry has a history with us. He has many years experience working with tarot and as a counsellor. And Terry has had we had a training lady coming from Melbourne who was trained. Terry was trained by the lady trained Terry. That's how it worked. Not the other way around, probably the other way around there. Terry's presentation will go for about an hour, and we'll have a short break for supper and a get together and resume for discussion and questions for about 15 minutes. We'll just see how we go. Note that we'll be recording this event for later reference. So if you want to go over things that you might have missed, you can do that. If you're here on Zoom, please remain muted when Terry is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments, and we'll open up later for discussion. Thank you, Terry. It's lovely to have you. We're so blessed, I can tell you. Amazing. Get out of the way.
Well, thanks very much for coming tonight. We've been talking about the tarot in a workshop. A few weeks ago we started, and what we found out was it was about the fool's journey. So I'm happy to be the chief fool tonight and to invite you along with me. And most of you will be familiar with Carl Jung and the things he talked about. But one of the distinctions he made was between our thinking function and our intuitive function. We used to say, like, the right brain was our intuitive function, the left brain was our thinking function. So it doesn't quite work like that. We work holistically, but generally we tend to associate the left brain with mathematics and scientific work and deduction and so forth. Right brain function we tend to associate with artistic things, imagination, poetry, and so forth. The tarot, work with the tarot is very much right brain stuff. It's intuitive stuff. Robbie Tulip last month actually, in his presentation, made the point that what they call non-rational sources of information, that's intuitive, just as important and just as valid as the so-called rational and scientific. So, for example, Beethoven's inspiration is just as important as the piano and the noise that came from the piano when it's played. So tarot work is very much intuitive work, because we're going to work with symbols. And the tarot cards, I don't know if people are familiar with them. Actually, I bought a deck there, but it's a bit small to see. People have seen them. I just thought a little while ago, is many tarot decks. This one is called the Rider-Waite deck, and 78 cards in the deck. 22 of them are called what's called Major Arcana, Major Secrets. The Arcana, they're the sort of things that you need to know so that your spiritual journey will be whole and worthwhile. And the Minor Arcana, well, they deal with how these major events play out in your life. But tonight I'm really going to focus on one card, and it's the Sun card. So if we can just have a look at the Sun card. So we'll be doing a bit of contemplating, thinking about the Sun and what images it brings up for you. So, well, the Sun card. The Sun sort of dominates, doesn't it? And it's as if everything flows out of the Sun card. And the red scarf, it seems to be a bonding thing, doesn't it? We have the Sun's loving benevolence, but you've also got flowers, a stone wall, a child and a horse. And there's the joyful bond between the child and the horse. And of course, it manifests new life, the baby. Maybe androgynous, couldn't really tell, but it's good to think of most of these things in the sense of being androgynous. Not man, woman, but female, male. We're all both female and male. Brain-wise, left brain, right, we both have left brain and right brain. So we are androgynous in a sense. Carl Jung, we're very much caught up in the theme of new birth, the inner child. And he spoke about an inner child to be created in him. So the human psyche is going to be the place where a new God image will be born. He said, the spirit of the depths taught me that my life is encompassed by the divine child. From his hand, everything unexpected came to me, everything living. This child is what I feel as an eternally springing youth in me. I'm now going to talk about the Kabbalah. I mentioned three things, or Jeannie mentioned three things that I was going to talk about: the Unus Mundus, the one world, the synchronicity, and the Kabbalah. But I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the Kabbalah, because we really don't understand the tarot unless we understand the Kabbalah. For Carl Jung, the greatest experience of his life was a Kabbalistic experience. I don't know if you've read Memories, Dreams and Reflections, but in that book, he had an experience of being present at a sacred marriage, the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage. And it was the marriage of Tiferet and Malkut. Now, they're two terms from the Kabbalah, and we'll get to those. But he said this is the greatest experience of his life, and it was the fount of all his subsequent work. And he was, in fact, he said in one place that the rabbis that talked about the Kabbalah, they anticipated all his work. And the second reason why I'm not going to spend so much time in the Kabbalah is that Arthur Waite, the designer of the Arthur Waite deck, he was very much in the Kabbalist tradition. And the third reason, because I think the Kabbalist theory deals with these big questions in life probably more satisfactorily than others that I know. You know, how did the universe get here? Why? What am I? What's my relationship? Is there a God? Those sort of questions. Of course, there are other traditions that deal with this question. I mean, our First Nations Dreamtime is a tradition, for example. I often thought it would be a great project to have a First Nations deck. But I'm ashamed to know I don't know enough about First Nations culture to do that. But I'm going to come back to that a bit later. Anyway, let's get back to the Kabbalah. At the outset, it speculates about the origin of the universe, the so-called Big Bang. Let's have a look at the Big Bang, if we can see it. So scientists say at the beginning of time, world time, maybe 13, 14 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. So the Kabbalists have asked, what was there before then? And they spoke about some force, they called it the Ein Sof. It's just Hebrew for without end, or Ein Sof Or, that's the Hebrew endless light. And so some artist picks what that was like. Everything that's in the universe now was there potentially in that initial singularity. We were all there too, with our thoughts and so forth, our emotions and memories in some sort of potential form. This state of Ein Sof, it's a complex of all possibilities. There's sort of no duality there. There's no light, dark, there's no spirit, matter, no good, bad, no I, thou. Relationships impossible, no I, thou, no female, everything was fused into a monad. This is a notion of the monad, a primordial one. So we have a look at a primordial one. It's a thought going back at least to Plato and maybe beyond. So everything emanated out of this primordial one. It wasn't created out of nothing. So the Kabbalah has a complicated speculation that the one contracted itself. It left a space into which it emanated an image of itself. And why was this? It's Ken Wilber, the philosopher, once asked this question: why is there anything? Why is there not nothing? And his answer was, no one likes to have lunch by themselves. So then maybe the one too didn't want to have lunch by itself, wanted companionship. Well, they called this, the Kabbalists called this process the tzimtzum, which is literally the emptying. If you're familiar with the writings of St. Paul, in a letter to the Philippians, he spoke about emptying, the Greek, the kenosis, it's called the kenosis. He used this term in relation to the Christ. The Christ emptied himself of his divinity to become man. So the same concept is here of this monad emptying itself and leaving a space into which it's emanated an image of itself. The tarot card of the magician picks this up. So we might have a look at the magician here. It comes up in the tarot deck as number 1. The full card is a 0 because he's there through the whole journey. So we have this sense of emanation, don't we? Something coming from somewhere, and you see the stuff he's emanating. So you can see what he has there on his desk. He's got a sword representing air. He's got a cup representing air, water. He has a wand representing fire, and he has a pentacle representing earth. So the ancient Jew, these were the 4 elements that made up reality. So, but the Kabbalah today is best known for its tree of life imagery, and so we're going to have a look at that next with the next slide. The tree of life. So what we see here is a crown at the top, which that's the point at which the Ein Sof, the light without end, first begins to emanate. It's the first manifestation of the Godhead. And the Godhead then manifests into reality through a series of stages. So if you can imagine a zigzag path from the crown to number 2, wisdom, Chokhmah, across to the number 3, Bina, understanding. So wisdom, in a sense, is knowledge of all possibilities. Understanding, Bina, gives form. And then we go across to imagine the zigzag going across to number 4. It's called mercy, chesed, loving kindness. Then across to number 5, which is strength, Gebjara. Then it goes through the 6, the central. They're called, each of these little circles are called Sephiroth. It's a word that derives from the Hebrew word book, but anyway, they're called Sephiroth. And in the middle, the heart of it all is beauty. And when the Christians got hold of this Kabbalistic idea in the Middle Ages, they identified the Sephiroth, Tipperath, with Christ, the Christ figure. Then we come down further to number 7, victory, across to number 8, splendor, and then to number 9, which is the foundation, Hod, and then 10. So we have the kingdom, Malkuth. Okay, now Malkuth is the kingdom. The kingdom is what we all are on earth. All the people, all the things, all the thoughts, all the poetry, everything. And so in a sense, it's all of God, but, you know, it's a bit more remote from the very top. So God's emanation begins at the top and comes down through all these stages. So the first 2 stages after Sephiroth, you'll see them there. They're called Chokhmah and Bina, and we might have let's see if we is there one? Go back one if we can. Yeah. See if we go. Stay with this for a sec. Stay with this for a sec. Gives you a bit of an idea of the Kabbalah. It may be not exactly good, but you can see from the English here. So you can see right at the top, the crown and wisdom, understanding. They're at, if you like, a divine level. And you've got a puzzling one there that's, we'll talk about that later. It's not quite a Sephiroth. They call it knowledge. But then you'll see the equivalent strength and loving kindness. And in the middle, you have harmony. Again, that's Sephiroth. Then you see glory and victory. Then the foundation and kingdom. So the left pillar, which is the one that's got understanding, strength, and glory, that's called the pillar of severity. And the pillar on the right is called the pillar of mercy. And the pillar in the middle is called the pillar of balance. So you tend to have a situation in which the extremes, the opposites, tend to be balanced and reach their harmony in the center figure. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Jeff. Now, this is what I wanted to get to. So when I mentioned that in the top of the Kabbalah, there are these generating forces, as we call them, Chokmah and Binah. But you might imagine them as Mother, Father, God. There's not God the Father, and there's not God the Mother for the Kabbalah. There's Mother, Father, God. And Baring has got a very nice expression of it there when she was speaking about the Kabbalah. She loved the Kabbalah. And she said, the mythology of this tradition restores the image of the sacred marriage in the union of the divine father-mother. There is not a mother and a father, but a mother-father who remain one in their eternal embrace, one in their ground, one in their emanation, one in ecstasy and continuous act of creation. This is the role of these generating principles. And she goes on to say, no other offers, she's talking about a tradition of philosophy, no other offers the same breathtaking vision of the union of the male and female energies in the one that is both. The Song of Songs was the text most used by the Kabbalists for their contemplation of the mystery of this divine union. Yet one has the feeling that this way to union with the divine may descend from some unknown source that nourished Egypt, Sumer, and India. Well, Malkuth, the end, that's the end point of the emanation, and it represents all of what we experience as reality. And yet all are still in and of God. Now, Malkuth is seen as a female aspect of God. And there's a marriage between Tiphereth and Malkuth. So we've seen those two figures, that central figure, the heart figure, and Malkuth. And it's a parallel of the version of the emperor marriage. Now, this is the marriage that Carl Jung experienced. Yeah, he said it's the greatest experience of his life. And as I said, it was the launching point for his major works. So all other marriages, and in a sense, wherever two are joined to become one is in a sense a marriage. They all participate in this marriage. And not just the marriage between two humans, but the marriage between, and especially the marriage between the unconscious and the conscious in the human psyche, between our inner female and our inner male, our anima and animus, as Jung would put it. There's only one world, the Unus Mundus, so there's only one marriage. And our own marriage, our inner marriage, or our external marriage with our partner, they're participants in the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage, and they share in that marriage. So this primordial one, what is it? There are many speculations. As I said, the Kabbalists referred to it as the Ein Sof. But the oldest tradition that I'm aware of is our own culture, Aboriginal culture. And it talks about the dream time and with a creator spirit called Bayami. Don't know how to pronounce that exactly. But Bayami, did it? Bayami, yeah. I noticed when I looked at it, so I saw that the last few letters is I am I, which are very much like the sort of thing that appears in the book of Exodus when God is telling Moses who he was. I am I. Bayami. But and I'll really come back to this. The rainbow spirit too appears. Well, sometimes they just say the answers, but the Bayami is a creator spirit, and he sees all and he looks after all. So he's got big eyes and got long arms. He reaches out. And I jump forward about 3,000 years, and Meister Eckhart, a great theologian, you know, he had the reputation as the man from whom God hid nothing. He seemed to grasp something like this when he was contemplating what this essence was. So Eckhart said, well, God is isness, but the best word for God is compassion. So I couldn't help but note, you know, you could apply that to Bayami. Sees all, therefore knows all, therefore is all, reaches out to all, has compassion. So it's as if they anticipated Eckhart by 3,000 years, our First Nations people. Thomas Aquinas, the great thinker, Eckhart's contemporary, he says, well, esse, Latin to be, the verb to be, that's the essence of the ultimate reality. And the Kabbalist tradition, it follows the reported experience of Moses on Mount Horeb. So when he was asked who was speaking to him, and the burning bush was speaking to Moses on Mount Horeb, the answer was, I am who am, Ahaya Asher Ahaya. But the Hebrew is a bit tricky to translate. And it could be, I will be that which I will be. And but Moses, when he was instructed by the voice to tell the Israelites, he said, tell them I am has sent you. So we keep this notion of I am, pure subjectivity, associated with compassion, very much the Bayami concept, if you like. Keep this in our mind. Now I'm going to introduce another card, and that's the High Priestess. Now she's very special to me, but to other people too. She's, when we looked at the magician, we saw this capacity and power for emanation, if you like. She is like us the female companion to that power. So, and in Kabbalah mythology, she's sort of the wife of I am. The Hebrews, you know, and the Canaanite ancient tradition worshipped also a female god, a consort of Yahweh. But the prophets and the writers didn't like it very much. So most of the time was spent trying to get rid of her. They never ever quite did. In Kabbalah mythology, she is the consort of Yahweh, but she's more than that, because you can look at her and you see much more than a Middle Eastern theme there, don't you? Because she's also Isis. Isis, the wife of Osiris, king of Egypt. And she was the mother of Horus. So these are divinity figures in Egyptian mythology. And she became one of the most powerful of the Egyptian gods. And Arthur Waite was strongly influenced by the Egyptian Hermetic tradition, just as well as he was by the Kabbalist traditions. And the High Priestess manifests both of these traditions. she's a bit hard to pin down. She's written about in the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, where she's described as the helper of Yahweh in the creation of the world. And it says there she loves to play in the world of men. And she was later identified as the glory of God, as the figure of wisdom, and also the Holy Spirit. The word Shekinah, the word Shekinah derives from the Hebrew verb shakan, to dwell. So the Jewish tradition was that Yahweh pitched his tent among the people. The Jews had this conflicting perception about God, totally transcended, beyond anything that you could imagine, eternal, infinite, and yet at the same time immanent and dwelt with them. So the tradition that Yahweh pitched his tent among the people, intimately present. So this concept of presence became a figure, the Shekinah figure. And the Shekinah became closely associated with Malkuth, the kingdom. Okay, remember, that's that end point of the tree of life, the reality, the world that we live in. So when Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, they were not only expelled, but their godness was expelled along with them. See, God's in everything. You recall that all creation is an emanation of God, and all creation participates in the I amness of God. So that I amness was expelled with them. And the Kabbalist tradition refer to this as the exile of the Shekinah. So she is now trapped in matter. And if you have a look at the Kabbalah, you can see she's a little bit sad about something. I spoke about this in my paper last year, Carl Jung and the Sacred Marriage, and I talked about St. Thomas Aquinas. He had a mystical encounter with the Shekinah, and it sort of became a love affair, and she looked to rescue her from matter. And the Song of Songs in the Jewish Bible is very much about this. It's about the passionate longing of the bridegroom for his lost bride and vice versa. And Thomas seemed to experience this. In his own person, he seemed to bring about a reconciliation of Yahweh and the Shekinah. In the Kabbalist tradition, it's the duty of everyone in their life to work towards the return of the Shekinah from exile, to restore the lost bride. Now, the tarot journey is about the journey of our soul. And the cards help us, that's us, our conscious mind, we experience this ego, to communicate with our soul. Although I think it's more the soul is using the tarot to communicate with us. I mentioned this, I think, in a little blurb that we put out before the workshop, and but there's a myriad of ways in which we connect with our soul. We know that, you know, dreams, music, art, and nature, altered states of consciousness, mystical experiences, and so forth. The soul is constantly wanting to get through to us, the conscious self. It wants to experience itself through us. We are being lived by our soul. So this is Carl Jung's realization. He wrote about this in the Red Book. Oh, yeah, no, I'm hanging in all right. I'll go and sit down when I get really tired. Oh, Jung wrote pages about the soul, and in the end he said, what am I doing here? It's rubbish. I thought and spoke so much to the soul, turned her into a scientific object. I did not consider that my soul cannot be the object of my judgment and knowledge, much more my judgment and knowledge are the objects of my soul. The spirit of the depth forced me to speak to my soul and to call upon her as a living and self-existing being. So that's so important. And as I said, there are many ways to do this, but the tarot is one way. It's a bit like, I don't know, a telephone line. And the cards, they're just cards with images on them. They're not magic, but they trigger something deep down in us. And we learn intuitively to respond to what comes up. James Hillman, he wrote a fine book called The Soul's Code, and he links soul with concepts like guardian angel. We each have a guardian angel, our daemon, a guiding spirit. He links it with image, character. He uses the analogy of an acorn. The last workshop, I gave everyone an acorn. Just as the acorn has the life of the oak tree encoded in it, so our soul has our unique code story embedded in it. And my good friend Meister Eckhart, it's just the guy who has such a great influence on Jung. He's cautious about talking about the soul. He said, whoever wants to name the soul, such as it is, in its simplicity, in its clarity, in its nakedness, will find no name to fit it. God, who is without name, he's got no name, is ineffable, and the soul in its ground is likewise ineffable. So rather than define the soul, Eckhart calls it a place. He said, the soul is the place where the God works compassion. I keep coming back to our friend Baimai. Now, note for Eckhart, compassion is not pity. Compassion is best understood in its Latin sense, that is to feel with. So the soul for Eckhart is the place where God is united in experience with the human person. So it's the place of personal relationship with God. So let's go back there. So let's have a look at the sun card again. And keep going to the. We had the right one. We'll keep flicking through it to. No, we'll keep going all the way. Keep going. Okay, stay there. So again, we look again at the sun on the left-hand side, and I just want to apply some of the words of Meister Eckhart to that image. Maybe you get a bit of a feel for what he's saying here. The highest work of God is compassion, and this means that God sets the soul in the highest and purest place it can occupy, in space, in the sea, in a fathomless ocean, and there God works compassion. In other words, in some fashion, we are in God, and such a being in is a land of compassion, of togetherness, of love, of non-dualism, of non-pity, of union. You know, I think Meister Eckhart, he didn't see that image, but it fits the tarot image pretty well. Just a few words about the Unus Mundus, one world. We sort of touched on this a little earlier about what the primordial reality of everything is, and from which everything derives. Idea goes back as far as Plato, at least. And it's a key concept in Dr. Jung's final work, Mysterium Conjunctionis, mystery of the conjunction. How is it possible that the opposites become one? The mystery of the many, and like the male and female, they join to become one. So Yeah. So this card, in a way, these two cards pick up the idea, don't they? So we have the sun image, this sense of dominance, the sun, if you like, dominating the scene and emanating everything. And I thought we just might compare it with the words from Genesis, because it gives this notion of image. And in both the cards, the lovers and the sun, you see the sun dominating in each of the two images. And the Kabbalist tradition, according to follows the book of Genesis, is that God said, "Let us make man in our image, in the likeness of ourselves." I want someone to have lunch with. He wants a relationship. So God created man in the image of himself. In the image, the word keeps coming up, in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God is obviously an androgynous entity of some sort. God is male and female. So this is a sense of the one world. Many, many different things. In the first picture, we have light, and we have flowers, and we have material stuff, and we have a human being and an animal and so forth. In the lovers, it's okay, we have the male and female, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life, and free choice, but everything is one. So, I mean, the sun, we look at the sun gazing on the image of the world. It looks to be looking in a mirror or seeing itself, the face. Where is that face looking? Or is it looking at us? Is the face looking at us and seeing us in him, or vice versa? So just a couple of words then on synchronicity. And so if it's the case that all reality has been imagined into existence, this is the Kabbalist tradition, imagined into existence by an entity that may be described as I am, or as pure subjectivity, then all objects, all events, all experiences, everything starting from that singularity at the Big Bang, they all have a single ground of being. I amness. It's pure subjectivity or pure consciousness. So in this view, this consciousness is the basic stuff of the universe. Might get an argument from Shauna here, I'm not too sure. But take an example of synchronicity. It might happen that an image comes into your mind of a friend. Haven't spoken to her for 20 years. And a second later, we get a phone call from her. So, unexplainable coincidence. So the Unus Mundus, the one world hypothesis, that all of the elements of that event, that now, but the sudden recollection of the friend, the feeling we had about her, hearing the phone itself, her feelings at the other time, and so on, they all have a common source, the one consciousness that is the ground of the universe. And there are, I asked YouTube this, there are reputable scientists who assert that consciousness is fundamental stuff of the universe. A couple of the examples they tell me were some names that you'd be familiar with: Alfred North Whitehead, Arthur Eddington, Ernst Schrödinger, Max Planck. Some of these are notable and famous cosmologists and physicians. A broad description of this theory is panpsychism. I had a memorable example myself. I might have mentioned this before, I'm not too sure, but I'll mention it again. For some months, I'd been studying biblical Hebrew at the University of Jerusalem online. And I was grappling with this concept of Yahweh, Jehovah. How is it possible that Jehovah evolved from everything, and he evolved from the Canaanite and the Mesopotamian gods and the area of Gilgamesh and so forth. It's a long story, but I'd reached the point where saying, surely this must be a load of nonsense. I'd almost given it up. And the front door bell rang, and I going, this is Jehovah stuff. And I went down and opened the door. There are two people there I'd never seen before. Good morning, the man said, we're Jehovah Witnesses. Well, that was more than just a coincidence, I can tell you. Yeah. Look, I'll conclude by suggesting that we just immerse ourselves for a moment in the sacred marriage, the Hieros marriage, the marriage of the Son and the High Priestess. There we go. Now, in a sense, we're already immersed in it because it's also our marriage, the marriage of our conscious ego mind with our unconscious soul. So Thomas's dying words capture the feeling. Oh, my beloved bride, my husband, thy voice has sounded in my ears and is sweet. You are beautiful. Come now, my beloved, let us go out into the field. Let us dwell in the villages. We will see if thy vineyard has blossomed and if it has borne fruit. There thou wilt give me thy love. Nobody shall be excluded from our happiness. We will live in a union of eternal love and will say how good and lovely it is to live two in one. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Terry. You've given us so much to think about. And if those people coming on Sunday, you'll have a head start with the other people. And yeah, also we have a break now for about 10 or 15 minutes. I think we have a break for 15 minutes. Gives everyone a bit of a time to get to know each other and also to mingle and to eat the supper. I don't really want to take it home. And we'll look forward to giving Terry a bit of a spell because he's done an amazing job tonight. And he's doing an amazing job with the tarot on Sunday afternoon. So if you're interested, I think a few people are here. I went on Sunday a couple of weeks ago. So we're starting up again on Sunday. And then we have another break for the long weekend because a lot of people head out of Canberra, long weekend, don't stay around. So we have to have another break. So it's actually good for us all because we can absorb the information and then we can go again. So that's probably good. Also, the books over here, if you're interested. If you become a member, you can take some books away home to read. That's part of being a member. So if you would like to have a look, we have the big book that Terry mentioned. It's over here. So you might like to have a look at that and look at what Carl Jung got up to with the mandalas and some of his thoughts. Okay, so I'd like you to have some supper now, have a break. It's a school bell thingy. Yeah, they're not listening. Okay, I'd like to have Terry come in over here now. He's going to, we're going to have a discussion and ask questions for Terry. And we'd like to have Terry and us conversations happening. And we have microphone, which means that we can be all heard. Thank you. Do you want to need a microphone or your own? Does Terry need a microphone? Okay, thank you, Terry.
The two Hebrew words, he will establish in strength. Yakin, that's the J. Boaz, in strength. He will establish in strength. It refers to a tradition of King David in the establishment of the temple. And in many of the tarot cards, you will find two pillars. And I guess they're all associated with the temple. So the high priestess in particular has the two pillars on either side of her. But Boaz also was a ancestor of King David. But it means strength, or literally in strength, Boaz.
And is it also about duality as well?
Yeah, it could be. That could deal with that. The big duality in the image of God is the male-female duality. And so, yep, good point. Yeah. Oh,
The two pillars that talked about their priestess, are they the pattern of the two pillars that you showed earlier with the tree of life?
Well, the two pillars on the tree of life are the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy. I never really thought that they were connected. But I mean, the same structure is there with the high priestess. The high priestess is the feminine aspect of the monad, or the emanating force. And so in that sense, she's a moderating or a balancing influence. So that's a reasonable interpretation, although I hadn't thought of that before.
I was talking to Wendy beforehand, we were talking about death, and for Wendy, who's an atheist, you know, she said, I'm not worried, like death is like when you're asleep, you don't know about it. And in terms of Eckhart and going back to the oneness of going back to God, the oneness, you lose the ego in that return. And if you've lost the ego, is there experience or is it just like that dreamless sleep? Once you lose the ego, you know, does that, you lose that subjectivity in a sense when you go back.
Yeah, the Kabbalists, they had a version, they had a structure for the soul. So there are 5 elements to it, but 3 basic ones were, one was what they called nephesh, which was that bit of our soul that keeps us alive, you know, our physiological system, our thinking and our breathing and the blood flow and so forth. Then they had what they call ruach, which is spirit, which deals with mostly our emotional state. And then third, they had what they called neshama, which is, they call that part of the soul that is the spark of God. So they would say at death, things relating to physiology and ego would disappear. But there would be a remaining aspect of soul, the neshama, that little bit of godness that we have, that never dies and never changes. But under that scenario, ego would disappear. But soul, as pure consciousness or awareness or whatever the Ein Sof is, remains unchanged. So the Kabbalists believed in multiple lives, so that the soul in its pure essence lived in successive ego bodies.
That would be the same experience as if you were a physicalist and believed in science and believed that consciousness died when the body died, because that experience of death would be like a dreamless sleep. And if all that's left is this spark and the ego is gone, that's the same experience. Because there is no individual left. So there is no experience of the individual. So the subjectivity of God is not something we're going to know about.
Yes, well, under the one world hypothesis, there is just one consciousness. That's the prime given. So if a particular person dies and their consciousness disappeared, consciousness hasn't disappeared. It might be for that individual, but the whole consciousness hasn't disappeared.
That individual consciousness has submerged into
yes. Yeah. A bit like the drop in the ocean, if you like.
It's basically that we are the world of the state. We have our acts and state. I like that analogy. It seems to me that it kind of fits into the image of God.
My hearing's not very good.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that. That's all. I wasn't trying to make a big deal. Sorry, Terry, can you hear me now? No? I just said that it's like Shakespeare's quote, life is like a stage and we are all players and we have our entrances and our exits.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's also, for me, correlates with the idea you brought out tonight of the image of God.
Yes.
That we are part of God's dream, and when we go to sleep at night, sometimes we dream and sometimes we don't. Where do the dreams go?
Yes.
That's an existential question, which doesn't have an answer, really.
Yes. I'm not sure I have it either. I went to a play the other day called The Mousetrap.
Oh, The Mousetrap,
and, we're sitting there and So here's the scene in front of me with all the players in it and all the props and so forth, and I'm watching it. And I had this sense of that whole scene, that whole interaction, and all this, the speaking and the conversation and the emotions, they all became one in my own mind.
Wow.
My consciousness made one out of a complex, apparently complex situation. I mean,
That's incredible.
when you think about it, well, we could do it now. I mean, if you closed your eyes and had a picture of this room, you will be able to picture who was sitting alongside you and what the noises were and so forth. But they're all actually in your mind, and you actually make one out of that. And this is one of the great insights, not insights, but one of the really interesting remarks that Meister Eckhart once made. He said that when he flowed out from the Godhead, everything declared God. So all the multiplicity of the world, he said, but my flowing back into God was more excellent. He said, because I took everything out of their own and made them one in my own mind. So somehow or another, his consciousness made a unity out of the many. So here's the paradox between the many and the one. We have from the many point of view, the complexities and puzzles that Shauna has just raised. But on the other hand, they disappear if there's only one world. If you don't look at it from a specific point of view.
I've got a friend I know from uni. He's finished now, but he studies Douglas Harding's work, and Douglas Harding was sort of a mystic and a self-taught philosopher who had this experience of having no head. So there are people who follow him. It's called the headless way. And the idea is that, you know, from a first person perspective, you don't experience your head. So I don't get into this stuff, but my friend's very serious about it. So he kind of practices it as a sort of a meditation where he kind of has the experience of a void where his head should be, so that there's no kind of partition of the inner and the outer. And in that sense, he becomes the environment, he becomes more at one with the environment because he's not separating the inner and the outer. It's not, it's pretty, I think it's a bit out there, but.
Okay. Reminded me a little bit of Carl Jung's famous dream when he was, he dreamt he was hiking through the Swiss Alps and he came upon a small little chapel. And when he went in there, there was a monk meditating and this in the dream. And so Jung then looks at the meditating monk, and the monk has Jung's face. And Jung's expression is, he is dreaming me. When he wakes up, I will cease to exist. So it was a sort of, I don't know what he made out of it now, except that I remember saying, what a weird sensation that must have been. But somehow another being without a head sort of reminded me of it.
I sometimes wonder whether when I have a dream about a cockroach, Whether I'm a human being dreaming about a cockroach, or whether I'm a cockroach who sometimes dreams about being a human being.
Yeah. Yes, Jung had the same experience. He didn't know whether he was thinking of the rock that he was sitting on, whether the rock that he was thinking on was thinking of Jung.
But it's a question of which frame of reference.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
I also think sometimes dreams are just so real that, you know, the moments when dreams do feel like they have a tangible reality, and you kind of begin to lucid dream in a,
Mm.
the dream does seem to have form,
Mm.
you know, makes you kind of think
Mm.
there are these dimensions that
Mm. Mm.
exist, you know, that
Mm.
there are these kind of.
Yes, whoever cooks up the dream is a very smart character. They're so beautifully constructed, and so I blame Soul for that.
But you mentioned in your talk that weight was influenced by Kabbalah and also Egyptian.
Yeah, Hermetic tradition.
Sun card, how does that show up? How do those two traditions show up in the sun card?
Well, the Hermetic tradition, the basic Hermetic tradition, you might, as above, so below.
Yep.
And there are a couple of the principles of the Hermetic division. That was one of them, as above, so below. Duality is an illusion, or altogether. There was he was a member of an order called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and they were people who were influenced by alchemy, Gnosticism, astrology. So how does the sun fit into all that? I mean, my main connection of the sun is with the one world notion, the non-duality issue of Hermeticism, where when I look at the sun card, I see unity based in the sun, that everything is of sun. You know, so to the extent that the Hermetic tradition, that's one of its posits, that there's a monad is at the basic level of all stuff. So, I mean, I guess that would be my answer.
Yeah.
And with the tree of life, would you also associate the sun with Tippereth?
Yeah, yes. The sun with Tippereth, the moon with Yesod, and the earth with Malkuth. Yeah, yes. So if you remember how the tree was structured.
So that would put then the sun as sort of central
Yeah,
to
yes,
the
yes,
tree of life.
yes. The sun S-U-N, but also S-O-N. Yeah. So when in around about the 14th century, some Jesuit theologians started to really get the connection between Kabbalah and Christianity. The Kabbalah can be used in almost any circumstance. I remember once doing an exercise applying the Kabbalah to, I wonder if our little machine is still going there. I wonder if you can pull up a slide number. mightn't be legible. Oh. I don't know if you can see that at all. When I go back to where we were. Anyway, I remember the time I was thinking about the Kabbalah and as an analogy for how things happen. You know? So Beethoven was in the concerto, okay? Yeah. So it starts off with Beethoven decides to dedicate a work to Archduke Rudolph. That's where he dedicates. He's going to dedicate a work. So he gets the idea. You know, this is the equivalent to the Einsof saying, "Well, I need a luncheon companion." You know. Is this working? Don't think it is. Doesn't seem to be making much sound, does it? All right. So that's Ketha. So the next point, it goes to Hochma down there. That says that's the next thing. So all possible sounds and combination of sounds is available to him for his work. So we zigzag across to Bina, across on this side. Bina, that's the empress. You remember, it's the prerogative of the female to give form to things, and so Bina, out of all this possible, the structure based on a piano format comes, and then there's a mysterious Sephiroth in the middle called Darth. Too complex to talk about that. But anyway, out of Darth effectively means knowledge. And so out of that pops all this stuff that pops out. Piano concerto and E flat major has popped out. And so the next stage, down there we have Gethera, which is strength. So it's the structure, the order, and the harmonization of the melodies. On the right is chess head, and that's the passion and the power and the sensitivity of the different interpretations. And at the heart of it all is the conductor, derive. And then down on the left-hand column, we have Hod, which is dealing with form and structure. So it's the skill and the control and the discipline of the musicians. On the right, which is the field of emotion, there's the passion, the energy, the commitment of the magicians. And yes, then I call that the orchestra soul, the meaning. And finally, you get down to the actual performance and Alkuth, the performance, the principle, the orchestras, the instruments and things. Anyway, the point being that a two-of-life template can be used in almost any situation, and it also can be applied to any philosophical or religious or spiritual system that might be developed. So even for our First Nations people, you could develop a tree of life structure that would fit the mythology of the first life people. Not too sure why it's said all that, but yeah.
Third question, I'm wondering if you would connect numbers and
the numbers, so 0, the full,
Oh.
1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the connection between the numbers
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the what's portrayed on the card?
Yeah. Well, you might remember number 1 was the magician, so that's the initial emanation, and number 2 was the high priestess. So these are the first two initiating powers representing, if you like, male and female energies. Then the number 3 card is the Empress, who is the, is this the numbers that you're talking about? Okay, the number 3 card is the
Yes.
Empress. So this is we talked there earlier about the mother-father notion of God. So that's 3 and 4. And then there's another card coming that I haven't shown here. It's called the Hierophant. So there's a whole series. The first 3 numbers are dealing, first of all, with the divinity structure of the Kabbalah, the top 3. We've got up there. Maybe we could go back to a tree of life. Anyone would do it. There's the one that up there.
Oh, yeah.
That'll do. So that picks them all up. So, okay, you can look up there. There's 4 is 0 because he's traveling through them all. Number 1 is the magician. Number 2 is the Empress. And then there's the number 2 is the High Priestess. So you can see there that all of the major arcana are linked as pathways between the divine Sephiroth. There are 10 Sephiroth from Kether down to Malkuth, and there are pathways between them. There are 22 major arcana, including the Fool. They're all there'll be 22 Hebrew letters and alphabet. They're all connected also. So the numbers of the cards just follow a sequence of the journey. So about the first number deal with the initial divine manifestation, and then the soul reaching a certain point of maturity. Then the next 7 numbers from 15 to anyway, about 21, I think. Not quite that. Deal with the maturity of the individual. They go through a series of cards, which we didn't look at today, and then the last 7 numbers getting up to the world card. Maybe it might be worth showing the world card because that's the end of the journey. The world card. So when we that's a better looking version of the monad than the dot. At the end of the journey, the sacred marriage has been joined, consummated. So a lot of the columnists looking at the world card actually say it's an androgyne figure, although it doesn't look like it to me. But anyway, it does represent completion because you will see the 4 figures on each corner. There's an ancient tradition called the Merkaba tradition, and it involves a vision of the prophet Ezekiel, who saw a chariot in the sky, and it had 4 figures: the figure of a man, an eagle, an ox, and a lion, again representing air, earth, fire, and water. So this was the marvelous chariot of Ezekiel, and there was a figure on it. This is a long way around it, but I'm just saying that this card, together with the wreath that surrounds it, is a symbol of completed unity of all of creation and the final consummation of the sacred marriage. That's what the world card, and that's the end of the journey. So the last number is 21 of the major arcana. What we say there are 22 major arcana cards. Remember the four, number 0. So the 4 is in all of them. So the 4 began pretty well, as we saw before, about to step into nothing, and he had nothing, and he was completely free, empty. He goes through the whole process of all the cards. The Hieros is finally satisfied, and he is at the end of his life journey. But each of the numbers, in our workshop, we've been going through them, as you know. We've got a third of the way through them. We're doing the last third on Sunday.
Thank you.
I suppose I'm intrigued.
Yeah, sure.
I'm fine that, yeah, why?
It confuses me too. There's so many paradoxes and twists and turns, and
I would have put her with the
the-
magician or the Hierophant.
if the sun has often been taken as a god image in many mythologies and traditions.
Okay.
The sun has been worshipped, and even the Christian tradition has a special sort of reverence for the sun. Not that they identified it with Christ, although the theologians did attach Christ to the figure of the sun. And the earth is in relation to the sun seen as a spouse, just as the relationship. I can't always follow the symbolism, and often it's paradoxical. I don't know. When you look at it, it's whatever grabs you. I haven't got a good answer.
Can I ask you about the high priestess?
Yeah.
Boaz and Jacob, the pillars. Is it true that those pillars from the Temple of David are the basis of the Masons to this day? Even in the smallest country town where the Masonic temple is a shed, they've make a big deal of the 2 pillars at the front. Is that from the same basis, do you think?
I don't know for sure, but I expect so, because the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, the Rosicrucian development, is the forebear of the Masonic Lodge. The current Masons grew out of this Hermetic tradition. Yeah. And the notion of the temple.
Can I ask another question? The Unus plus Mundus. Can we relate that to the notion of Gaia, where the Earth is a living organism that regulates its own ecology, and that, which reaches, of course, into a very contemporary sort of issues that our own MacKillop talks about here, which we might actually make a a discussion on sometime, actually, the notion of Gaia and the world as a living organism.
Yeah, I don't see why not. The notion of the Gaia is that it's a living organism and it's one organism, just as the human body is one organism. And the Earth is a thinking and conscious organism because we are of the Earth. We've come out of the Earth. We've come out of initially maybe crawled out of the swamp and turned into primates and then turned into conscious beings. Not quite so long ago in the terms of the history of the world, but we are of the Earth. So in the same sense that, you know, my little toenail is not conscious, but I am conscious. So, and I am a single entity. I am Unus Mundus. I'm one, definitely one. So the Earth, in that sense, if you like, we're holograms of the Earth, and that same principle applies to the universe. If it applies to the Earth and the solar, it applies to the solar system. It applies to our galaxy. It applies to the universe. So the Unus Mundus has universal application. Not just to the Earth, but to the universe.
Terry, does that also relate to the idea of the Sophia movie, The Wise Earth, and the Shekinah being something matter to the level of
It's like to in spirit matter again, like to realize that matter is actually spirit and to reunite the two.
Yes, the mythology is that mythology is that God got crossed with Adam and Eve. But in actual fact, it wasn't such a disaster because humanity became conscious at that point. But for one reason or another, that Adam and Eve got kicked out. But because their godness got kicked out with them, they got stuck. Here's a rift within God. The expulsion from Eden was a domestic argument within our androgynous God. A bit upset, but you know, she had to go. She is now stuck away. She's the lost bride. So that beautiful book of the Old Testament, the Song of Songs, is about the spouse searching for the lost bride and finally reuniting it. But
that book's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? That's not even mentioned in the book.
It's true. I mean, Yahweh doesn't get mentioned, but the Queen of the South gets mentioned. But anyway, what is mentioned is she's pretty miserable and she's dark and she's stuck and she's beaten up by her brothers. And she's longing for the bridegroom. But they do find each other, you know, and so the quote that Thomas Aquinas used on his deathbed, you know, we found each other, let's go out into the fields and we'll see if our vineyard has borne fruit. But until then, she's stuck. And so his particular vision of her was this terrible black cloud that was covering everything. And in his mystical experience, she is yearning for someone to come and rescue her. So, you know, the Shekinah is stuck in matter until she's rescued. And the notion of the responsibility of human beings to achieve inner reconciliation with our inner conflicts also releases her. So what we do with our own life in terms of getting inner oneness, you know, Christ kept playing, I pray that you may be one, you know, maybe one, as I and the Father are one, you know. So this oneness we achieve also restores the oneness of the divinity.
Some people say also it's recognizing that the sacred is in the material as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So rather than thinking that, you know,
Yeah, the flesh is bad. Yeah, no. That's the thing about the Kabbalah. It's all of God. It's all of God. We've still got to account for the dark sides, though. You know, wherever you, the opposites are always there. Wherever you have white, you must have black, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Whether you have up, you must have down, because otherwise it doesn't mean anything. Where there's supreme goodness, somewhere there's a shadow side, supreme badness, you know. I mean, God is all good? No. Isaiah 45:6, I'm Yahweh unrivaled. I cause woe when I bring misfortune. I do it all. So even the prophets realize that there's something about God that contains all of the opposites. So we can't escape the nature of reality, but it's basically all good. It's all of God. Yeah, so the notion that somehow or another that, you know, the flesh is evil, that's the distortion. Mm. The soul. This is where our soul is a spark. It's echo. It says it's actually a place where God works compassion, or works together with us. Eckhart can't tell the difference between the soul and God. Jung can't tell the difference between the self and God. Where he says the image. He says, I can't tell the difference between the image of the self and God.
To go home to bed, I think I'm just about fading out. So thank you very